All right. In this video, I'm going to be talking about why I think it's super important for parents to develop excellent persuasion skills. And not just regular persuasion skills, but persuasion skills that really match their kids' development and age in life. And I think this is probably one of the most underrated skills that isn't talked about, where, there's a lot of people saying, oh, parenting is about having a system, having rules, like, never giving way to your kids, all this stuff. You have some examples of famous TV shows, like, was it Super Nanny back in the day, right? Like, be strict and don't let your kids get away with whatever, and don't, don't change your mind too often or the kids will get confused. All this stuff about kind of a rule-based parenting approach. And so in that case, when you try to get your kid to do something or have them change their mind about something, it's usually an authoritative approach where you either say, hey, do it, or hey, there's a rule that you should do it. Or you might resort to these rewards or bribes or even punishment, right? If they do something or if they don't do something. Now, all of that, in my opinion, is drastically inferior to a relationship-based and an internal-based kind of decision-making process for kids. And let me explain this. See, if a kid is growing up in a household where they're constantly being, in a way, threatened or bribed or pushed to do things that they don't really want to do, but they're only doing it in order to get something or to avoid some action done to them. In that case, the kids don't really develop this deep internal conviction that drives decisions, meaning they do decisions or they do certain actions based upon, right, certain avoidance or certain things to get from the system or from the parents. So in a way, it's a very externally driven decision-making process, and that in a way forms their worldview a lot, and it forms their decision-making process and even their moral compass in a sense, right? They're going to do certain things based upon, right, the benefits that they can accrue from the system, which includes the parents, or the actions or the negative consequences they can avoid, right, in that system or through the parents. Now, a much better way, I think, for kids to grow up and for parents to safeguard is a more internal decision-making process where kids internalize the benefits that they receive and they internalize the consequences for their own actions that aren't driven by an externally placed kind of artificial system on the kids. So let me explain this a little bit more. So today my kids, I took them to play tennis in the beating sun and heat here in Houston, Texas. We're visiting for this month. And they sweat a lot. They come home. And I'm like, hey, I'm taking a shower. My wife's like, hey, you guys take a shower too. And my kid's like, what? We want to take it later tonight. And my wife's like, no, take it right now. You guys are going to smell. So they start arguing. And I'm like, immediately, hey, talking to my wife, you need to improve and work on your persuasion skills. You need to get into their mind and explain things that they can understand from their perspective. So, for example, a lot of parents in this situation would be like, just do what I tell you to do. Or they'll be like, if it's a chore or something, they'll be like, hey, you'll get a certain amount of allowance if you do it. If you don't, then you don't. All this stuff, if it's a big negative action, right, you get grounded. All these rules and systems in place. However, kids are amazing. They're like, their thought processes, generally speaking, are amazing. Each individual is so precious, and each individual, in my belief system, in my beliefs, really has a deep inner compass and inner decision-making process that I think is very sacred and we need to develop as parents. So rather than forcing our kids through kind of external rules and punishment, my whole approach is, hey, let's talk to our kids from their perspective and explain the benefits and the consequences, let's say positive and negative consequences of various actions or habits over time. Now, the difficult part of this is that kids, generally speaking, can only or usually are able to only look at one time frame at a time. So let me explain this. When our brains mature, one of the things about maturity in terms of brain development is if we're able to look at various time frames, let's say 1 month out, 1 year out, 10 years out, 20 years out, in 1 hour. We're able to kind of synthesize these different time frames into one framework, and we're able to make decisions. And this is a very complicated process where you actually have different ways to view the world through different time frames or lenses, and you're able to combine them together to make a framework, to make a decision on whether something is beneficial that you should do or you should avoid. Now, kids, on the other hand, the brains are still developing, and typically they do much better by focusing on one time frame at a time. Meaning, rather than talk about some vague thing of the future, don't you want to take a shower because don't you want to build a habit and be a clean adult when you grow up? It's so vague. What timeline are you really talking to with a kid? Like 1 year down the road, 10 years down the road, 30 years, 40 years, like just their whole life in the future. It's so hard to understand that. For kids, it's just like you're short-circuiting, right, their brain in a sense, because they haven't developed the ability to really synthesize multiple time frames all at once yet. So a much better approach is to look at their perspective from their perspective and choose a time frame that you want them to dive into and to explore with you together. For example, let's say you're 40 years old and you're married with kids. Do you want to like, not take a shower very often, like once every week or 2 weeks or whatever, or do you want to take a shower often and smell clean and, whatever? Like, put them in a specific time frame, right? It doesn't have to be something 40 years from, or 30 years from now or something. It could be something just, immediate, right? In the short term, let's say in an hour, right? Feeling good. Or maybe there's some benefits of, just of being clean that you can identify in a certain time frame, right? So the idea is to dive into a specific time frame and identify the benefits in a way that they can understand as benefits, and also avoiding negative consequences. And so my wife, took this to heart, and she started to research with AI, saying, hey, what are the benefits of showering right after you exercise? What are, and listing out some different things. And there's some actually pretty interesting stuff going on that you can actually talk about, immediate benefits actually of showering right after you exercise. But that's the whole thing. It's like we have to understand that our kids have, in a way, a sacred inner compass and a soul that yearns to make decisions and to understand, right, the decisions that they're making and to have conviction, right? I think that's the thing. It's like when we're raising kids in a rule-based kind of fear-driven or reward-driven system, and parents create that in their household, you're not developing conviction. Kids who believe in the things that they believe, they do things because they have a deep-hearted, strong belief that this is the right thing to do, that this is the most beneficial thing to do. Rather, they're driven by this external rewards and punishment, this system that's placed around them, and they do it just because, right, they're trying to avoid something, or they're trying to get something, and they know that all of this stuff is kind of artificially placed upon them, and they don't really buy into it. And you have kids who just, drag their feet, and I don't think this is developing character. You want to develop character, in my opinion, with kids who are independent thinking, who own and grasp, right, the worldview and the incentive system that is reality. It's not some externally placed system on them, meaning whatever that they decide because they really believe it's beneficial to them or to others, and they strongly believe, not because there's some person giving them a reward or punishment. And this is, I think, one of the greatest potential or benefits of parenting in a way where you're thinking deeper, right, beyond traditional ways or beyond what the next door neighbor or what the TV tells you how to parent. But if you question those things and you say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish in our parenting? What kind of kids are we trying to raise? And I think the value and importance of raising strongly convicted kids, right, is super important. Like, for example, in the world 10, 20, 30 years from now, right, we're going to have lots and lots of changes. Technology is going to, rapidly change the entire world as we know it. And rather than having our kids become adults that are easily swayed by popular opinion, by the latest trends, by some person talking on YouTube saying this or that. Rather than that, like, don't we want our kids to have an internal conviction, an internal belief system where they make their decisions based upon wisdom and discernment, and looking at different scenarios or time frames and what benefits and consequences there are to various actions, and they start building, right, that system or that way of thinking, where it's a holistic way of thinking, where they're incorporating reality, objective reality, with their decisions, and they're developing the conviction. Right, so I tell my wife, and I remind her often about this. I'm like, hey, our kids, when they do something, they really need to understand what they're doing. They need to do something because they believe like this is the best thing for them to do, right? It's not like forcing our kids to do something where they're just like, they don't want to do it. It's like that's the opposite of what I'm trying to accomplish as a parent, right? The other day, my wife was talking to my kids, and my daughter was kind of like arguing about doing something, and my wife was trying to push him to do something, and then she basically gave up, and she was kind of like teary-eyed, saying, fine, I'll just do it. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's stop here. That's not what we're trying to do here, right? The idea isn't to force them to do certain things that they don't really buy into, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of like, why we need this so-called extra system of rules and punishments, because they don't want to do it on their own. Therefore, you give them external, right, rewards and punishments to kind of almost manipulate and force their behavior in a certain direction. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, hey, our kids need to, in my opinion, really understand and believe and have conviction in the things they do. So when they do something, they do it out of strength. They do it out of clarity, right? They do it out of a crisp, clear thinking of why they're doing what they're doing. And so I stopped that, and then we backtracked, and I'm like, hey, forget it, right? We're not gonna, don't do this just because like you think someone's trying to tell you to do it, or you're tired, you just want to give up and just do it, right? No, we want you to do what you really need to do, what you've decided to do, what makes sense to you, and let's talk about it, right? And then I'm able to help my kids understand different benefits or consequences, right, of different actions in different time frames, to help them develop, right, the perspective, right, that they need to make convicted decisions. Now, a lot of this is predicated, I think, on this idea of consequences, or cause and effect, of habits lead to certain scenarios in life. And I think this is a super important concept where kids can understand, and I think the earlier you do it, the better. But it needs to be done in a nuanced, in a right angle, in the right way for kids, or else it could be something that's pushy, that's overwhelming, that's just not effective. So here's a couple ideas or principles to keep in mind. So first off, this idea that habits can profoundly impact the direction of one's life and quality of life, and also the relationships in your life, is super, super important. I think it's one of the most foundational principles in child raising, which is to help kids understand this concept of certain habits have great consequences of benefit, and certain habits have terrible consequences of destruction. It's kind of like what you plant, right? The seeds of what you plant, they end up growing and multiplying, right? 100,000-fold. And in a similar way, what we seed with our habits end up building our character and our values that have immense impact in different ways in the future, positively or negatively. So now this is the general concept, right? And adults can understand the theories of it, and some adults don't even really understand or buy into it. But I think this is probably one of the most timeless principles that is essential for kids to learn, and for parents to understand. This is one of the most important goals we need to have our kids grasp and internalize themselves. And one of the big reasons is because if kids can internalize this idea of consequences, right, of actions lead to certain habits, which lead to certain, let's say, fruit of behavior, then what happens is they're able to internalize the reasons why they're going to do certain things, because they're building certain habits which are going to build certain fruitful behavior or some terrible behaviors or later in their life, right, that lead to bad consequences. So this is the whole framework for kids to understand this, which is, yeah, what seeds are we planting? The seeds lead to, right, our actions lead to habits, which lead to building different things that lead to more consequences. So the whole idea of, I think, empowering our kids to internalize their own decisions is, it's all an opportunity. Each day, each moment, each decision that the kids are making is another opportunity to build another layer on this building or this foundation of their thinking and worldview and how they make decisions. So for example, every day my kids, and I might interact in probably, who knows, 5, 10, 20 ways where they're making certain decisions and we're discussing things, and I'm shedding light in different ways of how certain actions can lead to certain habits and they lead to certain consequences, and it helps my kids understand the context of their decision, and they're able to internalize their decision in a way where it becomes their decision. Like they decide to do it because they get it. They're like, this is the best decision. Why would I make another decision? That'd be crazy. That'd be stupid. I'd be like, a fool to make that decision that leads to bad consequences, because this is the right decision, right? It's so obvious to them, right? And that's what we're doing every day, 5, 10, 20 times a day in various situations. Each time is an opportunity for my kids to build another layer. It's like another layer on the foundation, right, of their worldview, of their value system, of their decision-making process. And what we're building is all of this layer by layer, 10, 20 times a day or whatever, 365 days a year, over many, many years, builds the essence of their character, right? It builds the foundation of conviction, of an empowered individual who doesn't just fake it and go with others and just follows the crowd wherever, has no moral backbone of their own. No, we're talking about, this is the foundation of a person, of a noble person, of a heroic person who actually has their own values, their own system of view, worldview, and they're able to verbalize it, not just verbalize it, internalize it, understand, right, what the benefits and the consequences of everything this is, and they make decisions out of conviction. Now we're talking about, a really effective leader, an effective person of influence, right? A change maker, a person who's not just going with the flow, but a character or a person with real character. And I think that's the aim. At least that's my aim with parenting, is not just to, develop, raise another kid who's a number, or who's just goes to a certain college and gets a degree and gets a certain job. Like that's not the point, right? The point is not for them just to follow the footsteps or steps of everyone else in this world. The point of, I believe, parents raising their kids is to raise kids who, in their deepest of beings, in their deepest place, they grow conviction and clarity, that they are able to discern, right, decisions to make, how to make those decisions, and they go with it with independence and strength. That's why I think this is the way to develop strong-minded adults, or kids who become adults. Too many times, right, there's people or kids who become adults and they're weak, in my sense, weak-minded. They don't have their own moral compass or own convictions. They don't have their own clarity in life. They don't even know what to do, per se. I think a lot of that is because they're being placed in a system, and the system is telling them what to do, right? Do this and you'll get rewarded, right? Do this, you'll get an A. Don't do this, or else you get suspended or grounded, or you'll get an F. Do this, you'll go to college. Do this, you'll get a job, whatever. Everything is just externally driven, right, for the kids. And they get to this place where it's like, okay, what do I do next? And no one's telling them what to do next. So now they're confused because they got so used to everything around them telling them what to do. Right? They're in other words, it's weak. Their convictions, their inner strength, their inner discernment. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to make decisions in a way if no one's telling them what to do. I think that's what we don't want. And I think that's, in a way, the conventional norm with raising kids. And I think in order to fight that, in order to really go against it, we need to completely rethink our objectives with parenting. Right? What are we trying to do with our kids? What kind of kids are we raising? And we need to be strategic, and we need to really understand like how we're going to do it, right? How each layer of what we're building is being built. And after each day, after each week, we need to have that confidence, like, oh my gosh, I did it today. I did 10, great layers on my kids, like really conviction and discernment and wisdom. And they're really building that strength in them. And you could see it happen because each decision, each scenario they're understanding, every time the kid understands that a certain, let's say, set of actions or habits lead to a certain, outcome in a different time frame. And okay, let me take a step back again on this, because I think it's crucial. How do we build now this layer by layer character, this layer by layer discernment, this layer by layer strength of moral conviction, where our kids know what to do? So a lot of it, I think, does depend on the skill of the parent and how they communicate and persuade and present to their kids. First off, this is why I'm a big proponent of parents being deeply involved with their kids' lives. I mean, school teachers, nannies, etc. I mean, I don't think they're going to have the same amount of love and conviction of a truly loving and present parent. Maybe there's some nannies and school teachers that are exceptional, and maybe their parents, or in certain families, their parents are absent, or maybe there are certain restrictions or certain situations where the parents can't even be present, and maybe it's beyond their power. So I'm not going to say this is for everybody, but that said, so how do we exactly layer, right, this kind of teaching our kids and helping them discern their decisions and get their own decisions and own convictions to the things they're dealing with? And I think let's liken it to, let's say, farming or something. And let's say, each day what you want to do is you've got this land, and it's being, if you don't do anything, it'll be taken over by weeds. But if you do something and you till the land and you plant the seeds, it's going to grow different amazing crops and fruit, okay? So let's say every day with your kids, it's like this land. If you don't do anything, the kids are going to adopt different things, and most likely, right, you're going to have weeds, and it's not going to be the greatest, land or situation. So what you want to do as parents is you want to take every day as kind of like you're a farmer and your kids are kind of your work. And what you want to do is you want to help them get through the day and basically uncover the confusion or the lack of clarity around certain decisions that our kids do and our decisions our kids make. So for example, let's say you have two kids and they're fighting and they're arguing and they got into argument, etc. Now there's a confusion right now amongst in the kids' minds where they're like, what do I do? And it's not just confusion, but it's actually a lot of times it defaults into something that's not wise or not discerning, right? Where it's just basically punching or saying mean things and like this, it blows up or something. In this case, the parents need to step in my opinion, and they need to bring clarity to basically help the kids understand the consequences of what's going on if they're magnified and amplified over time. So for example, if this is the only fight, then fine, it might not be the biggest thing. But if this continues, right, and it continues where tomorrow they don't like each other, a week later they're still, at it, and a month later it continues, like you could make a case and you can draw up a picture of, siblings who fight, and there are many siblings who fight, and it actually becomes a really detrimental, right, destructive kind of trajectory where I've known siblings that hate each other, right? They can't stand to be next to each other or around each other. And that's the natural consequence of, right, of fighting and not resolving, right? Fighting and not compromising or not having empathy and really trying to find a resolution. And so you can present this to the kids where you're like, hey, there's a habit where fine, you can argue and stuff, but you value and love the person enough where you express that love and you try to find a compromise, trying to find empathy, right? And don't hold a grudge and try to really make up and be friends again. Or there's another habit where you hold the grudge, you can't find resolution, right? You continue that grudge day after day, week after week. You have more fights, right? It continues to snowball and spiral into something that's not great. And you can explain this situation not in a vague, adultish way where you're explaining so many time frames over time, but you could just explain it very simply and say like, hey, imagine there's two siblings and they start fighting, they don't resolve it, it continues, the next day, the next week, and in 30 years, imagine they live in the same city, but they never talk to each other. They never, at Christmas, they don't want to see each other, right? Because they don't like each other. And help them to understand a scenario 30 years from now, where if there's two people like that who don't resolve, right, their fights and their differences and don't understand how to resolve them, and find friendship again, what happens? What are the natural consequences? Now, kids are very, very good at understanding and imagining things. They're not great at combining multiple time frames. I mean, you can't just make a vague thing of saying, oh, what if you continue to fight? What's your future going to be like? That's too vague. It has to be a specific time in the future. Give them a specific scenario to think about and to understand, and they can dive in. And it's like a movie to them. They can completely imagine the situation very, very well. And that's going to help them understand their present situation. It's like, oh, that's why, not just us fighting, but not resolving and holding a grudge, why it could be actually a really big deal. And it changes their mind about their present. And they're like, hey, I don't want that future. I don't want that thing 30 years from now. I want it to be different. I want it to be where, and you can do a opposite scenario where in 30 years they live in the same town, but they call each other up a lot. They visit each other's house every week, and their kids love each other and all sorts of stuff, and how awesome a sibling relationship could be in 30 years. So you can compare and contrast. So the kids have something, and in their mind they're going to now want to decide which way they want to go. And it's obvious, right, if presented in the right way. And they're going to decide, hey, no, I need to resolve my relationship conflicts right now because it has super profound impacts in the future, let's say 30 years from now. And that's how they're going to be motivated to do some amazing things in the present that most parents can be shocked. Like, how do my kids find a way to resolve the conflict or treat their sibling with such love and respect? Or how do they become best friends? It's because they understand the consequences of their actions in these scenarios. Like, they understand, if I empathize, if I resolve, I treat with respect and kindness, and if there's a problem, I even like give up some things I might want, and they understand that can lead to an awesome, right, relationship 30 years from now. That's just amazing. They're going to want to choose that and make certain decisions today to ensure that happens. And that's in a way conviction. That's in a way personal, like, values. That's clarity and discernment. And that's wisdom, in my opinion, where the kids themselves are making that decision because they understand the sequence. They understand that this can lead to this, and this other path leads to a different path. And they choose the path they want, and they internalize it, and they understand their situation right now, and they're able to make their own decisions on what to do right now, and they'll make it for themselves. It doesn't matter. No one has to say anything in terms of do this or do that. They don't need any rewards or punishment or anything like that. And in fact, that all just complicates things. That's all just muddles things, right? They just need the clarity. They need the clarity. Someone has to step to their side, on their side, and someone has to help communicate and persuade the kids to understand the nature, the truth of their actions and the consequences their actions have as they develop into habits, into lifestyle, into all this stuff. Like, over time, the parents, and I think the parents have the greatest responsibility to come to the side of the kids. And that is in my opinion, one of the greatest responsibilities that parents have is to do a great job with this. And in my opinion, it has the greatest reward because you have kids you're developing, you're raising that are convicted kids. Like they have clarity and they are so strong and they know right what they're gonna do. They know how to do it. They stand out. And these are the kids, right? We're trying to raise, in my opinion. And this is the future. This is the world. This is what we need in the world, right? From adults, we need people who will stand with conviction, who see things clearly, who aren't just driven by whatever the external factors and people telling them to do this or do that. And I think that's the cool thing about parenting is, in a way, you get to almost like change the future and recreate a world that people that you envision, right? The world needs. And sure, I might not be raising 8 billion people, right? And it might just be my 2 kids, but who knows? Maybe through videos like this, I have impact on some parents and they raise their kids. And who knows? Maybe we do have a movement or other people who see in a similar way the importance of raising strength, raising convicted kids who see things clearly, who make their own decisions, and parents who understand their role as being so crucial, so critical, right? It's profound. I'm telling you, man, this parenting thing, it's amazingly profound, and it's super impactful, and I see it every day, right? I see the impact I'm making on my kids. I see the layer and layer that I'm building of their character, their worldview, and how they make decisions, and I see that clarity growing and that conviction growing, and that's maturity, and that's growing up, I think, in a healthy way. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful. Don't take it in any means by this is the only thing you need to do for parenting. It's not. I mean, there are other things I want to talk about. Hopefully I'll share more. Check out my past videos on different things that are super important in my opinion. This isn't the only thing, but it's just something today that I was thinking about a bit. I wanted to share, get it on video, get some discussion going. Now, if you have any questions, just go ahead and add a comment, add a question. Who knows? Maybe that could be something I could talk about in another video. All right. See you guys later.